Hello, boys and girls. This is Mrs. Girma, your school librarian. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to talk about what copyright is. And if we look at our title here, it says, what is copyright and what does that mean to you? So let's get started so we can look and see and learn. When a person makes anything such as a drawing, writing, or work of art, they are the creator of that work. They own the copyright to their work. So I want you to think about that. Think about something that you have written, maybe a poem, or maybe something you have drawn, maybe a dance you have created, or even just a work of art. That means that you are the owner, you are the creator, and that you own the copyright to your work. Now, the author and the creator of the work has the right to do any of the following. So let's look and see what we have listed here of things that you are able to do with your work. You can make copies of your work. You can show your work publicly. You can perform your work publicly. You can share copies of work with others, and you can change and modify work. But first things first, let's find out what copyright means. Here I have a pretty big definition that I got out of one of my books that I read. The author's name is Smaldino. And it says regulations that describe the manner in which an original work can be used and copied. Copyright laws regulate the manner in which authors or artists can be reimbursed for their creative work. So let's break that down and see exactly what that means. Here it says regulations. Now, regulations is another word for rules. There are specific rules in which created work can be used and copied by someone else. Then it also says that there are rules in which authors and the artists may receive compensation or money from others for using their work. Now, if anyone breaks those rules, they could be in serious trouble. So let's find out more of what that means. If someone deliberately or on purpose breaks a copyright law or rules, they may end up in court or have to pay the copyright owner money. Now, the copyright owner would be the creator, just like what we talked about in the very beginning of the video, when we said that if you are the creator, if you are the author of something such as a poem or a drawing, a dance, a work of art, or even a writing, you are that copyright owner. You have the right to do all of the things that were mentioned earlier. But if any of those rules, if any of the copyright violations are broken, then it can be a serious crime. But let's not worry. Let's wait just a minute. There are always ways to avoid breaking those copyright rules. We just have to know what we can do and what we cannot do. So, number one, very, very important. If you borrow any of the work that belongs to someone else, if you are not the creator and you want to use something that someone else has created, if you want to use their poem, or if you want to use part of their drawing or their dance, their work of art, their writing, the first thing you need to do is give credit. What that means is that when you're using someone else's work, you just have to make sure that you give the author's name. You say where you found the information. You make sure that you put the year that it was published and the publisher. And I'm going to show you an example of how I have done that as well, okay? So here we have something called fair use. Now, fair use provides an important copyright exemption for students. The word exemption means that it does not apply. So if you were to use the fair use, then that means that you would not fall under breaking copyright rules. If you use small portions of copyrighted works for educational purposes, but it must be noted that the material being used is copyrighted, and it must be noted who it's being copyrighted from. So if we look down here, look at this down here. It says Smaldino, and then these are the first and middle initials, and then this is the other author, Lowther and Mim. And it comes from a book called Instructional Technology and Media for Learning. It's the 12th edition, and Pearson was the publisher. So I used some of what I wrote here, and I used a small portion of it. And because it was not my words, I have to cite it, what we would call citing down here. I gave the author, the book that it came from, and also the publisher and the year in which it was written. So therefore, because I only used a small portion, it falls under fair use. Now, there are 4 basic things in determining what fair use is. We just talked about one just a second ago and talking about small portions, but we always have to remember that there's no absolute guidelines for fair use, but this is something that we can go by. So if we look at this, purpose of its use must be for education and not for commercial, to sell or to make money. So whenever someone is borrowing a work that belongs to someone else, the purpose of it must be for education, and it cannot be to sell or to make money. Now, the nature of the work, for example, if you're reading a magazine or an article for education purpose, then that falls under fair use. But if it's a cartoon, a movie, or music, or anything that could just be used for entertainment, that may not necessarily fall under fair use. It has to be for educational purposes. The amount of substantially of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. What that means is the less you use, the better. Simply that. If you use an entire paragraph or two versus just using a line or two from something, it may not necessarily fall under fair use. So always remember, the less you use, the better. And effect and the use on the potential market or the value of the copyrighted work. Is it taking away money from the creator of the work? For example, in watching a cartoon or movie or for entertainment, does that in any way take away money from the creator? If it doesn't, then it falls under fair use. But if it does, it may not, because remember, there are no absolute guidelines, but these are things that you can go by to see and define whether something is being used for fair use. Now, here's something very important. How do you get permission to use copyrighted material? Well, there's a few ways here. First of all, you get permission from the copyright owners, and an adult can help you with that. Your teacher, your parents, they can help you find out who the copyright owners are and be able to reach out to them. So when you reach out to them or anyone who is looking for permission, you need to make sure that you are being specific as possible and that you tell them what you're using it for, and how much of the information you're using, and if you'll be making copies and how many. Now, be prepared that there may be a fee for its use. However, a fee means that they may charge. However, most of those fees and charges can be waived or negotiable. So that just means that they can say that they are not going to charge anything, or you can negotiate the price in which is being charged. So here are just some copyright facts. So copyright continues as long as the creator is alive and 70 years after his or her death. So it also mentions that if the copyright was made for hire, the copyright is good for 100 years after it was created or 75 years after it was first published. So copyright can remain for a very long time. And so one thing to always look at is to see the date that it was published, and to make sure whether or not the author is still alive. And those are the best ways to be able to see whether copyright still exists for a particular piece of work. Now, there's something else that's very important that's called public domain. Now, what this means that there's authors, illustrators, artists, or anyone who creates work can also place their property in public domain. This allows their work to be changed, copied, and published without having to ask permission. So there are no copyright rules or copyright laws that would apply to anything that is in public domain. So I want us just to think about the things that we've talked about today, okay? In summary, what we want to do is we want to be able to understand copyright and why it's important to us and how that applies to us. So we know that it can affect you and if you don't follow copyright regulations or rules. We need to always make sure that we cite our sources and tell where the work came from, just like I did with the example of Smeldino in the book that I used. And fair use and free domain are so important. So knowing less is better. Always make sure to ask for help if you're not sure. So these are just a few of the things that are so important, boys and girls. I just want to thank you all for joining me today and learning about copyright, and I look forward to our lessons. Thank you so much.